What's going on there, fellas? This is Hot and Cold Takes number 8, where you guys give me your controversial lifting-related questions. I tell you whether I agree, disagree, maybe try to include some lifting-specific information that could make this potentially helpful, and I give out the coveted Hot Take Award. The criteria for a Hot Take Award is that it has to be genuinely controversial, I would say, among people that at least kind of know what they're doing, and then I have to agree with it. And then eventually I think I might start keeping track of those of you who regularly comment on the channel, who's got the most hot takes, who's on the leaderboard. So that's something we might get into. We're going to get back into our regularly scheduled, more informative centric videos because last week I just finished up my peaking phase of training. We're rolling into a new hypertrophy training cycle. The training's a little bit less interesting, so we're going to go back to more of our traditional rotation of videos for a little bit. Also because, and this is just me being a dickhead, but it kills me when I post some early training cycle sub-maximal work. I always get a couple of people messaging me. They're like, oh, you only did this for 8? I've done that for 8. So basically we're as strong. You're just doing more on your singles somehow. Oh my God, I know I'm following a plan. I promise you are not going to catch me any day now. That's just my ego talking, but I always get these goofy comparisons. So I'm like, I don't want to post this sub-max work because someone's going to have hit this at RPE 10 and tell me that, oh, wow, that's weird. We're doing the same rep work and you're hitting more. The RP is a little bit different. People always do this to Max, and it always cracks me up. But now that we're rolling into a new training cycle, the fatigue will be coming down. I gotta say, one of my least favorite mechanisms in the body is the fact when our fatigue gets really high, like we start accumulating a lot of fatigue late in a training cycle, two of the things that happen is our sleep gets worse and our appetite goes down. That's a terrible mechanism, and I cannot stand it because those are the two most helpful things for bringing that fatigue back down. So usually at the end of a training cycle, my sleep gets a bit shitty. I'm pushing through my food because I can, but I can't force myself to sleep. So we're a couple days post-training cycle. The sleep's starting to come back, but it's still pretty suspect even for me. So if I'm mumbling over my words a little bit, I apologize. We're going to put 15 minutes on the clock and get through as many of these as we can. There's lots of good ones here, so I'll probably try to answer the rest of them in the next one of these. I'm going to try to build a little rotation of the common series we have on the channel. So let's get into it. The first one, hot take, mental fatigue is more detrimental to performance than physical fatigue. Not acute intra-workout fatigue, more like chronic fatigue. I would tend to agree with this, right? So when we are fatigued, our perceived effort tends to be disproportionately affected more than our absolute effort. That is to say that if we come into a session feeling pretty fried and we hit 75% for a set of 5, let's say, our perception of that difficulty is going to be thrown off more than normal compared to the absolute difficulty. Maybe it's 1 RPE harder than it would normally be under less fatigued conditions, but it might feel 2 to 3 RPE more difficult. So that's one thing that I might mention there. And yeah, I would say most people run into the negatives of mental fatigue before the negatives of physical fatigue. Someone said totally agree, especially for those that aren't elite lifters. It's easy to fatigue yourself. It's not easy to fatigue yourself that much physically, but it's really easy to get burnt out mentally if you have 4 to 6 workouts a week, 1 to 2 hours each. I would tend to agree. I would say the average lifter is going to be more detrimentally affected by burning out, and they need to structure their training in a way that's going to help them avoid burnout. That's more likely to be what stops their progression than this constant overaccumulation of fatigue, because as this guy mentioned, it is not impossible. It can certainly be done to chronically overtrain and totally exceed our recovery capabilities, but it's hard. Whereas it's not hard to get burnt out, frankly. So I would say, yeah, more people are negatively affected by the effects of like mental fatigue than physical, though both are very real and should be considerations within your training. I would say that's probably controversial enough to qualify. And I would say that ultimately I agree. If I'm looking around at people who are intermediate, low-level advanced, late-stage beginner, I see mental burnout being a much greater limiter to people's progression than I do constantly overdoing it. Maybe the people I see constantly overdoing is it's more they're under recovering. You've got that old cliche. People will say, oh, there's no such thing as overtraining. There's only under recovering. Well, there's definitely a quantity of fatigue that we could hit if we're a very motivated individual, where even if we're sleeping for 9 to 10 hours, and even if we are in a chronic caloric surplus with great macros, great micros, of course, there's a number that we could hit where we're going to be chronically outrunning our recovery. I can say that I believe I have done it even with great variables. I don't know what else I was supposed to do no, you're just under recovering. There is such a thing, although many people are not hitting it. Although some people definitely are exceeding their recovery capabilities only because their recovery is greatly impeded by the fact that they're not eating consistently. They're like, oh, I eat 4,000 calories a day. Well, no, the day that you were tracking, you were extra good because you knew you were tracking and you ate 4,000. You didn't account for the day after where you only ate 1,500 because you weren't hungry. And then we're not taking the average across the week. So chronic, super variable calorie intake, super variable macros, super variable, if not bad sleep. You could say, okay, realistically, probably the training load here isn't the issue. It's your poor management of your recovery variables that are making you in that chronically overreach state. But I would say certified hot take award given out to Home Slice. The next one, I've said it a couple of times, and I'm sure this is a polarizing one. If the same person starts at 200 pounds and permabulks his weight to 308, he'll be stronger than a 200-pound person taking a moderate doses of strong androgens to a similarly lean 220 or 230. This is not across the board, but for presses and squats, it holds true. Not just the strength aspect, but literally changing your shape to a more optimal to move heavy objects around you. He's referring to the fact that when you thicken up, your bicep runs into your forearm a little earlier in the bench press, and especially on the squat, we start getting more structural stability where our hamstring hits our calf and our stomach hits our thighs, and we get this much more supported bottom position. So your physiology, past just the muscles, is improving your leverages potentially. Big Chris 2 on this platform is the quintessential example of when bloat maxing beats out trend blasting freaks. Yeah, absolutely. There's a certain amount of weight discrepancy to where a very high level natural power lifter in a high enough weight class is going to be outperforming the untested lifters in a lighter weight class. Now, how much of weight discrepancy is going to offset that difference? Who the hell knows? It varies from every individual, right? There's the responsiveness to the androgens, which is going to vary from person to person. Like some people are going to get a very dramatic effect out of it. Some people are going to get a very lackluster effect out of it. So yeah, I would say that some amount of body weight discrepancy would probably give a natural lifter an advantage. You would probably have it easier to, let's say, hit a big bench press or let's say hit a big squat than a much lighter guy taking aggressive androgens, as you said. I would say most people would agree with that. I would say that most of the argument would come with the fact that, how much is that discrepancy? And it varies too much for me to throw something out there, and I don't think it's the best discussion in the world to have. One thing that does crack me up about Big Chris and that Andrew Richards guy is the fact that the comments are filled with simultaneously people saying that they're lying about being natural because, Larry Wheels, did this overhead press. Well, first of all, they're dumping all of their training economy into it, where Larry Wheels is and was a world record holding powerlifter that had to divert all of his training economy across his career against 3 lifts that aren't even the overhead press, and probably would have gotten a greater result had he been an overhead press specialist. And 2, there's a massive discrepancy in body weight there. So people will somehow say that this is not possible natural and they must be lying, but also say, wow, this is a 1x body weight overhead press. This is unimpressive. You kind of got to pick between those two. It's either unimpressive or it can't be done naturally. And that always cracks me up. But I'm going to say no hot take medal award for you because I don't think that fits the criteria of controversial enough. I would say that most people who actually kind of know their way around strength training would say, yeah, of course, at some point, a body weight differential is going to offset the effects of gear. If you buy into the numbers that Greg Knuckles has put out there, gear accounts for like a 10% variance in strength, and like a 5 weight class differential is going to account for a greater variance than 10%. You could be the strongest juiced up 130 pound guy in the world. I'm going to guess they're not lifting as much as, let's say, Max, who's like 200 pounds heavier than them. of course that's going to you're going to run into that effect at some point. And I don't really care enough to debate where that point is because it's going to vary so much from person to person. We don't have a body of evidence. It would just be a weird circle jerk. The next one, with the exception of having a horse neck, having freaky arms will make the biggest impact on how your physique looks, given that you have a solid base already. As in, if you were to pick one body part to be dominant for the rest, and your goal was to look your biggest, arms would be the way to go. I would say that if we're talking about the perception of people in day-to-day life, if you have big enough arms, they will perceive you to be a all-around muscular person when you're wearing regular clothes. Part of that's the fact that in day-to-day clothes, they're quite a bit more visible. But there's a reason that, there's curl bros that don't train anything else because they get a lot of the societal benefits of people saying, oh man, that guy's really fit. He's really muscular. He's huge. And you're like, well, but what about all the other muscles other than arms? Well, he gets the benefits of it. He's very efficient. He only trains that. So I would guess that's probably true. And that's why the curl bro phenomenon exists potentially. The next one. Barbell rows are objectively the coolest looking exercise. Oh, wait. Does that get a controversial take award? No, not controversial enough, in my opinion. I'm trying to keep the standards high here. If I rob you of your medal, I am sorry. I'm trying to keep the criteria strict. The next one, barbell rows are objectively the coolest looking exercise. Any exercise with body English looks cooler than the same exercise strict. Highly controversial. I would say barbell rows look pretty cool. I don't know if I can say that they're the coolest because I think overhead press looks pretty cool. I think a heavy push press looks pretty cool. And I also think a heavy deadlift looks really cool. So no, I'm robbing you of this one. And then any exercise with body English looks cooler than the same exercise strict. I think it depends on the magnitude of body English. Something like rows is it's so weird because there's people doing 3-plate rows that are strict enough that I'm like, hey, that's pretty goddamn impressive. And then there's people that are doing 500-pound rows that are bad enough that I don't really find them impressive. So it's not really just it's not something I think you can assess just on the paper. There's a very subjective movement quality assessment going on with how good I think someone is at rows. Because I've seen some guys I don't consider that strong rowing 5 plates badly enough. And I really don't think it's impressive as someone who's done his fair share of rows through a very variable amount of quality. So it's something that I've kind of I assess on my own extremely subjective terms. And I would say that there's a level of body English where I think they look far less cool and are a very silly use of time in the gym. Now, a controlled amount of body English, like if you watch the old videos of Ed Cohn doing them, where yes, his torso angle was changing, but the speed at which it was changing, it was almost like more of a controlled body English to where we're able to reach further at the bottom, we come up, and we're able to get a greater squeeze at the top, where we're trying to position ourselves to get more work out of the back, not just trying to yank and then pull ourselves to the bar. That, I think, looks pretty cool, and that I find pretty effective, but no hot take metal here. Let's see. New serious lifters should default to using hook grip if possible. The risk of a bicep tear is real, and just don't pull with your arms won't prevent all of them. If you're new and able to choose a grip to get used to, choose hook. I would say that if you watch nationals, all of USAPL nationals, the number of bicep tears occurring is quite minimal. So the risk of a bicep tear in a drug-tested athlete or a natural athlete is probably not that high. Yes, freak accidents happen, but you could probably make the same argument of, if we take a wider grip bench, our risk of a pec tear probably proportionally increases. That's true. We're going to be shifting emphases from one thing to another, regardless of the technique we make. And we can't let ourselves be governed, or all of our training decisions be governed by extremely low probability outcomes. I would say that for the most part, flexing your tricep and being diligent about not rowing the weight is fairly effective in preventing bicep tears in my experience. I would say if we're talking about a deadlift bar, a big percentage of people are going to be able to effectively set a hook grip because it's thinner, and a lot of people would benefit from that symmetrical upper back position, but I don't think it's a one size fits all. I think there are good athletes that can do both and choose to use a mixed grip for a reason, because for some people, I don't know if it's the discomfort or the positioning of hook fundamentally changes their mechanic of breaking the weight off the floor for the worse. So Max was able to do both. We found that his competitive results were better with the mixed grip. I would say, yeah, I mean, I would give it a try. I would say that if that eases your mind about it, and that's like that symmetry in hand and back positioning is a net positive for you, I think, yeah, absolutely, probably everybody should give it a try early in their training career. But I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all answer of if you can, you should. Because like I said, I think that the risk there is not as numerically large as people tend to think, especially when we consider that many of the bicep tears we see are in untested athletes that are using hormones that are going to let them lift more weight than their training has dictated, right? Because if our training builds us up to a number, as a natural athlete has to, presumably the training logically leading to that number will also lead our tendons to making the adequate adaptations. Whereas if we take something exogenous that kind of ramps up our central nervous system and gives us this, suddenly I'm able to lift like 20 pounds more than what my preparation dictated, then we don't get those tendon adaptations, so the risk goes up. Lots of them are masters athletes, and lots of them did a lot of their deadlifting in straps in the training cycle and then switched to mixed grip pretty close to the meet. So they lost a lot of the ability to externally rotate at the shoulder joint and are forced to externally rotate at the elbow joint instead, potentially putting the bicep in a risky position. So if all of our preparation is specific and that we're never losing that ability to externally rotate at the shoulder, I don't think the risk is too high. I don't think this is a bad take by any means. I just don't think it's quite that one size fits all. Next one. Now this is a long one and I'm very bad at reading, so bear with me. For recreational lifters that want to get stronger, the lifting buddies that gym culture hypes up are often more detrimental to their progress than positive. Yes, if you are new, they might help you actually go to the gym, but that also leaves you with excuses if they can't make it or your gym schedules don't fit. If your buddy is way ahead of you, you may learn a thing or two, but it may lead you to do the same or very similar workouts without understanding why, which is more likely not the best thing in the long run. If you are ahead of them, you may waste time and likely aren't very focused at the gym and are more focused on coaching someone when you should be focused on your own efforts. If you want a close buddy to get someone that has the same goals and about as advanced as you are. Otherwise, just get friendly with people that tend to be there at the same time. You can talk to people without having a play date every time you work out. Brutal phrasing. I like that. That's funny. I think that it just depends on the... We'll do a few more. I've got time. I think it just depends on the quality of the training partner. What you've described is like, okay, well, if you're training with someone far worse than you, maybe you're spending more time coaching than you are training, which might work out in the long run. It might not. I would tend to think that if you have the ability to train with someone who's a lot more advanced than you, and we're going to use the term advanced here, not stronger, because, you know, your buddy might just be a big old hoss and is equally advanced to you. He's just stronger. So we're saying more advanced in terms of more experienced, more thoughtful, and knows more about the lifting, and is more advanced in his process. Most of the time, that's going to also correlate with being stronger, but not always, especially when there's a big discrepancy in body size there. But if you can lift with someone better than you, I highly recommend it. You're going to pick up a lot of things. And if you're conscious about your training and you're not just on like full autopilot, you will say, okay, well, I'm going to do a lot of things similar to this guy. He's going to explain to me why he does them, but I'm going to pay attention. And eventually I might say, okay, well, 9 out of the 10 things I learned from this guy are great. And they've greatly helped my progress over my peers. But I think that this 10% of things applies to him, but it doesn't apply to me. I'm going to deviate from what he does at some point there. So as long as you're conscious, I can't recommend training with someone more advanced than you enough. I wish that was something I had have more opportunities to do. But yeah, shit lifting partners are going to not only not improve your workouts, but they're going to actively take away from your intensity if they're constantly just talking about things completely unrelated to lifting. They're not giving you positive feedback, or not positive, but they're not giving you productive feedback while you train, and you end up taking far longer rest times than you should. You get cold between sets because you guys are just gabbing it up. Probably not going to be a net negative for the quality of your training, but a good lifting buddy goes a long way if you can find one. They're worth their weight in gold if you can find one, but we should also be able to train productively by ourselves. I'm not giving you a certified hot take award, unfortunately, because I do think that a good training partner is as good as people hype them up to be. I just think that not everybody is a very good selected training partner for you. This one isn't even a take, but we're going to include it. I love barbell power shrugs, but I only do them because they rub up on my junk, and I like that. Conversely, that is exactly why I don't like them. I can't say that smashing myself in the balls with 5 plates over and over was the most fun thing in the world when I gave those a go. No hot take award there. Let's see. Okay, we got plenty for the next one, so I won't have to put up a new community post between this. We'll do 2 or 3 more. We'll see how these are. The next one, there's no such thing as a bad exercise. There's utility in every movement to varying degrees depending on goals, how it's executed, and the individual. Now, on surface level, let's say, yes, that is probably a controversial take. And yes, you are correct that every single exercise, assuming we're moving against resistance, has some varying degree of utility. But I saw someone post on Instagram about this, where people will call it they called it like the toolbox fallacy. Is if we believe all exercises are just another thing in the toolbox, we tend to just throw a bunch of useless tools in the toolbox. There's probably a tool that you're never going to use, and it would probably just bog down your thought process to have that in your toolbox. I'm going to use a very simple example of this, and it's going to be a tricep kickback. Presumably, we're going to be doing a tricep kickback for additional tricep hypertrophy work. So yes, it does offer some level of benefit towards that goal, but there are so many exercises that will do the exact same purpose, but better, that I would go so far as to call it a bad exercise. Now, I understand the argument that there's no bad exercise, but in practical application, even if it's like, okay, this is a little bit oversimplistic to just say it's a bad exercise, we need to break down, why other selections might be better for the vast majority of tasks, or maybe even all tasks that I can come up with. It's probably a little reductionist to call it a bad exercise, but in practical application, I don't really mind it. So I don't necessarily agree with you. There are some exercises that I think people casually into fitness probably wouldn't be hurt by labeling as bad exercises, simply because they might fill a goal, but there are so many exercises that are going to just objectively do that better. That being said, people get a little bit too far into the weeds of this exercise might be very minorly better than another, constantly focusing on optimization rather than focusing on what you enjoy and what's going to maximize your adherence. That might be a net negative for a lot of people. But I do think that, it's not the worst thing in the world to oversimplify things every now and then if it's going to lead people who are very casually into this to be able to avoid kind of paralysis by analysis. That's kind of the tricky part, is dogmatic statements about fitness are going to probably hurt those people that are very casually interested in this and give them a very false perception of how this whole thing works. But also constantly providing extremely nuanced takes people who aren't that passionate about this, aren't going to take the time to think and organize things. They feel very paralyzed by this fact that we could potentially do anything and see benefits. So it's kind of a tricky line to walk. And my hatred for tricep kickbacks probably lets me say that there's at least one bad exercise. Being big won't make you happy. Learning to enjoy the process of getting big might. Yeah, I would say that's a reasonable take. I just don't think that's controversial enough to get you the award. I would say that most people I know that have gotten big because they were unhappy in life weren't suddenly happy in life. I've known a lot of big people. I've been around a lot of big people, and that hasn't worked. Really enjoying the process has brought me a lot of joy in my life, but no hot take medal. All right, one last one. People who lift for hypertrophy only can benefit from doing singles, doubles, and triples. Pushing progressive overload through strategies like double progression, a rep goal system, or evolving rep ranges is great, but you can fit in your program a strength lift on a certain day for better neurological adaptation and getting a better sense of your progression. I do not agree with this at all. I do not think training from 1 to 4 or even 5 reps is probably a great use of time for an athlete whose only focus is hypertrophy. We can drive good neurological adaptation with a set of, let's say, 6, which is the lower end of all the big old giant rep range that we find to be equally effective for hypertrophy, assuming, let's just say, the difficulty is comparable. If you go all out on a set of 8 and all out on a set of 20, though going all out on a set of 20 is pretty brutal on some exercises, and most people that think they are might not be actually reaching that same proximity to failure. So that's kind of where we might skew towards the lower end of this 6 to 30 rep range. Is it's not that hard to take a set of 8 to near mechanical failure or 2, whereas on some exercise it is disgustingly hard to take a set of 20 to true mechanical failure or very close. So that's why we might skew on that heavier side sometimes, depending on the exercise. But we can drive really solid neurological adaptation in like the 6 to 8 range, so the lower end of that. So if we wanted to have one day of heavier squats to better gauge our progress and drive some neurological adaptation, we could work up to a heavy set of 6, and that would be very quantifiable if we wanted to quantify our progression via our performance. But it would also be still productive training. The problem with having a strength lift is then we're investing training economy and recovery economy into something that probably is not moving us towards our goals all that much. Working up to heavy singles, doubles, and triples is relatively taxing for a very minimal second-hand reward at best. Maybe by firing up our neurology and being able to progress our sets of 8 a little bit more aggressively, we might be able to drive a little bit more hypertrophy. But we can also just progress in that 6 to 8 range by itself, and we don't need this kind of roundabout way to push that forward necessarily. So I don't agree. I don't think athletes focused on hypertrophy should be training in that 1 to 4, 1 to 5 rep range at all, unless it's a separate goal of theirs, which is perfectly valid. There's nothing wrong with saying my goal is to be big and strong. I think that is a very simple goal that has somehow been neglected a little bit with time. Cable presses and weighted push-ups are superior to the bench press because they allow you to protract the scapula. I can protract my scapula on the bench press. If you go like this, I would say most of the people that I see bench pressing at the gym are protracting their scapula pretty heavily. So I don't think it's impossible to do. I think that including exercises that allow you that easier range of scapular movement can help and fill in some gaps that might be left by the bench press. But something like weighted push-ups and cable presses are very hard to overload for a very extended period of time with a good standardized rep quality. So I would say in those ways, the bench press might be better. We have better loading control, and it's probably a little easier to standardize our technique. Sure, yeah, it's maybe a little bit less easy to train through a maximum protraction retraction range of motion, but we're also not limited to doing a single exercise. So using these exercises to fill in the gaps left by bench press training could make a more comprehensive and complete training routine rather than just saying that they're better, because I think both have strengths and weaknesses. We'll do one more because I'm having fun. Optimizing injury avoidance is tied with progressive overload for importance in training. Damn, I'm giving out like no hot take awards today. I'm trying to remember if there's any of these I could throw in here that I agree with. All right, we're going to end with one I agree with. If I just read out yours about the optimizing injury avoidance, I will include that in the next one so I don't snub you here. Lifters will do anything to avoid steady state cardio, which is a shame because it helps you not die. I agree. I don't know how controversial it is, but I will give you a hot take award for that because it's a good point. And people, even if they agree with this, don't seem to be doing any general physical activity. And that would probably behoove them. Thank you guys for watching. This has been Hot and Cold Takes number 8. We're going to get back into the daily posting now that I'm not absolutely buried in fatigue and going heavy on squats and deadlifts twice a week. So let's get after it.